It's fast, affordable, and even one of the best used sports cars that you can buy. Welcome back, guys. Or if you're new to my channel, this is Automotive Anonymous, and that's a 2010 Corvette C6. It even has a cam and full bolt-ons, making it pretty dang rowdy. And today I get to share the good, the bad, and the ugly of a C6 Corvette that's modified in this manner to help you decide if this might be the right performance car for you. So you can expect to see a walk around, all the specs, initial driving impressions, 0 to 60 on GPS, and then my final thoughts to help you decide what do you do with a rowdy blue C6. And huge thanks to Twin Full Chevy for letting me borrow this one for the day. I'm gonna link it below if you're interested. Otherwise, let's dive right in with this review. If you like big cammed engines, the color blue, or my video, please consider liking my video. That small kindness goes a long way. It helps me know you want to see more stuff like this, and it helps YouTube know you want to see more stuff like this in general. Thank you, guys. But if you're new to the Chevy Corvette, you really need to know that these first came out back in 1953, so they've been out for just over 70 years. This one specifically, though, is part of the 6th generation, or it's called the C6, which spanned from 05 to 2013. One of the best, most iconic looking Corvettes ever created, and there were a few higher horsepower iterations of the C6 over the years. So you should know that the base model, the LS2 6-liter from 05 to 2007, it only had a measly 400 horsepower and about 400 pound-feet of torque. And then in 2008, these got upgraded to the LS3, which is a 6.2-liter, making 430 horsepower. And then there were those higher iterations mentioned about 27 seconds ago. So in 06, you got the 505 horsepower Z06, and in 2009, you got the apex of them all, the ZR1, which made about 638 peak horsepower. But this one, which is a 2010, that started life as a 430 horsepower Corvette, it actually has a big Texas speed and performance cam, full bolt-on, so more realistically, it probably peaks out about 550 crank horsepower. And some bad news that came out with the C6 is you guys might be wondering why you always find the 05 to 08 models. Well, something happened in 2008, something that I like to call the recession. So Corvette sales dropped from in the 30 to 40,000 range from 05 to 07, 08-ish, to about 13,000 for every single year of the remainder of the C6 generation, because people didn't have the money to spend on a $50,000 sports car. And it's a shame because these only got better and more refined as the years went on. Anyways, since 1953, there have been over 1.7 million Corvettes sold. This is an American-only car, and they're actually assembled homegrown, thankfully, which means they are still assembled in the Kentucky Bowling Green assembly plant. And if you want to pay a little bit more money on your brand new Corvette, you can even get a museum delivery, which would be a pretty special experience. And honestly, I personally still feel like the Corvette is kind of the mini supercar, the budget supercar, especially now that they're used and you can find a $30,000 example with over 500 horsepower like this. But this really built off of the C5 or the 5th generation Corvette platform, having old school styling with the huge hatch, the huge reverse hood, and a lot of the typical Corvette characteristics with the more modern, more efficient LS series of engines. So in my opinion, this is just about my favorite generation of the Corvette personally. I think the value's there. I think the rawness is there, especially when you make it more powerful, as you're gonna see pretty soon. It's not tame. It's nothing like that 2006 Corvette I drove for you guys last year, and it's nothing like the 2024 Corvette I drove for you guys just recently. This thing is honestly a beast. It does not really belong on the streets. It definitely belongs on the track, but more on that later. And I do think it's worth mentioning that the Corvette is about 14.5 feet long, roughly 6 feet wide, and just under 4 feet tall. The wheelbase, though, is just under 9 feet, so it is pretty planted, pretty stable on the road. This one probably weighs about 3,200 pounds, although there was a little bit of discrepancy between engine, between the top, whether it's the target top like this or the convertible. And so it has a payload capacity of 423 pounds. So between you, your passenger, and your stuff in the hatch, that's how many pounds of stuff you can carry on this one. There's a variation in final drive ratios depending on if it's a Z51, a higher trim level, the manual, or the automatic. The most aggressive you can get is in the manual, it's a 342. The most aggressive, or the range in the automatic, is as poor as a 256 up to a low 3, which basically the lower the number, the better MPG you're getting, but the worse torque you're putting down to the wheels. It can do a full circle in about 36 feet, and it has roughly 4.5 inches or so of ground clearance. I realized just now that I failed to mention that the weight distribution is basically 51% in the front, 49% in the rear, so it's about as close to 50% as you can get, which is why these handle so incredibly well. But you should know that the gas door, it's on the driver's side. There is a button to unlock it from the interior on the dashboard, so the bums can't just pop that thing open as easily and siphon your fuel. But it's about an 18.5 gallon tank. It's rated with this automatic transmission for about 18 city, about 25 highway, so your max road trip and range is actually nearly 450 miles when you keep your foot out of it. And then it does have a staggered wheel and tire stance, which is typical Corvette. It has a 285, 35, 19 on the rear. It looks really good. This is the factory size tire, but it actually is a Mickey Thompson, and it's very sticky, but it's only a 285, and you really need at least a 305, 315, 335 for the power levels that this is putting down, especially on the streets that I'm driving it on. And the front, it's a little bit smaller wheel, so it's a 245, 40, 18. And then lastly, this is your GM Corvette key. It does show Corvette on the back. It can lock and unlock it, but you can leave it in your pocket because you have the proximity key features basically with the electronic button right there. When you open up the door with the electronic button, it opens right up. Unfortunately, it's a Corvette from 15 years ago, so black plastics. They're soft. The armrest is barely usable. The handle, though, is pretty legit. You have the electronic button, your controls right there, your locks. You have kind of like a hazard reflector right there if the door is left open, because the door is huge. It really is pretty big on these coupe cars. You have a snack pocket, a speaker, Corvette on the door sill, and then leather seats, which are mildly powered. I find that interesting. Actually pretty decent bolstering for base model seats. They're not very wide though, so they're easy to move around. And then you have aluminum pedals. Unfortunately, we're missing the third pedal on this one. And then the hood release. You have the options right there to pop the trunk and the gas door. Ventilation. Blanks, because it's a base model. You have the cruise control and lighting stock, the dashboard lighting, and overall, it looks like a really nice place to be. So let's hop inside. Sitting inside here, it's actually really nice, although this one, it's rather dark inside because the interior on these Corvettes was often black, and this one doesn't have the glass target top. But overall, it really feels good. I'm 5'11", and it's easy to find a nice position. The materials have held up well, although, you know, it is the GM plasticky stuff, and when we drive it, you're probably going to hear some squeaks and creaks if you can hear that over the sound of the exhaust. But overall, it's nice. It's a leather-wrapped wheel, although this wheel did come from the Chevy Cobalt, which was a $15,000 car, and then they rebadged it, putting the Corvette emblem on it. It sounds pretty decent. You do have the paddle shifters on this 6-speed to push forward to upshift and forward to downshift. And even the little paddle shifters, you can use them on either side with one hand, and it's pretty cool. If you want to upshift and you're going too slow, it doesn't let you, or you can downshift. And it works pretty good for engine braking or if you're about to do a roll race. Otherwise, it'll actually stay in that gear for a little while, which is pretty cool. So it lets you have decent control of the 6-speed automatic, but keep in mind, the shifts. There is a bit of delay between when it shifts on the screen and when it actually shifts in real life, if you can hear that downshift or upshift in the exhaust, but it's still a fun party trick. Otherwise, when you fire it right up, push button start, roars to life, the needles dance, and here's a little bit more revving. Otherwise, it's a really nice place to be. You have ventilation, roughly 7 speakers. You have an aftermarket Pioneer system in this one. A few more bits of information up here, but that's not what this video is about. This video is about hearing and feeling the rumble. I don't know if you guys can see that on camera, but it's pretty extreme. And then you have a little bit of storage right here. It goes down. You can light up your cigarettes if you're a smoker. It even has an aftermarket USB port added and an aux, but otherwise a lot of it is basically bone stock. Everything basically besides the powertrain and the infotainment radio right there. Otherwise, you can go down to reverse. This is your backup camera. So basically use your mirrors, use your eyes, because the screen's not going to show you nothing from a 14-year-old Chevy. And you have the traction control button, 2 baby-sized cup holders. It's not like today's cup holders, which fit 40-ounce Stanleys. You have a manual e-brake, although I do wish that was more on the driver's side rather than the passenger side. And because these seats aren't overly wide, the backpack is comfortable, held in with the bolstering, but because they're not overly wide, you can get right to the cargo capacity back here, which I love the coupes. I don't like the convertibles as much personally, because look at all that room. Lots of room for activities back there. And then the typical side opening center console, which because the torque tube is under here, you don't have a lot of room, but honestly in the Corvette with a 12 volt, it's actually not very bad. You have some fancy features on the rear view mirror, the compass. I don't see any garage door openings, but you do have the OnStar settings. And then we have some incandescent lights. It doesn't slide though. But honestly, you're probably not gonna need it. And like the typical Corvette owner, just wear a ball cap. Anyways, guys, let's turn it off and I'll show you the hatch. The back of the Corvette actually looks really nice, and this is a nice simple view that a lot of people can get used to, if you know what I'm saying. Otherwise, there's a few ways to get into the hatch area of the Corvette. You can either push the button that's on the dashboard, you could climb through the front seats, you could push the button that's underneath the Corvette emblem where a backup camera would typically be, or just use the remote and pop it that way. These are kind of cool how they pop up. And then you have 22 cubic feet of room back here, which is more than enough for your golf clubs and your groceries, making the Corvette a great road trip car or even a daily driver when left bone stock. You have a light right there. You have some storage cubbies with a fix-a-flat kit and a few tools in that one. And then you have the clips to hold the top when you don't want the target top on. Overall, it's really cool, and the hatch doesn't open extremely high, so it's likely gonna fit pretty conveniently in most people's garage. But with that said, let's drop it down, watch it kind of soft close, and we'll move on to the passenger side. And if you get a ride shotgun in the Corvette, the only other seat offered, there is a little electronic button right there, just like on the driver's side, but you have a nice huge panel of plastic for the door. There's a little bit of storage right there. You have your window control, your locks, but that's about it. Otherwise, Corvette on the door sill. The backpack's having a good time. It's manually sliding and adjusting and reclining seats, but does it care? No, not really. There isn't any storage on the transmission tube tunneling, and the glove box is locking. Not huge, but it's a sports car, so what you get? You get an airbag, you get some vents, and you're gonna be having a good time. But with that said, let's come around to the front. I'm gonna pop the hood and I'm gonna show you what the 6.2 liter full bolt-on engine looks like. So pop the hood. Under the hood is the 6.2 liter LS3 that started back in 08 for the Corvette generation. And these are stout. From the factory, it made about 430 peak horsepower at about 6,000 RPM and about 424 pound-feet of the twisty stuff at about 4,400 RPM. But this one, with its long tube headers by Cooks, the rest of the bolt-ons with the exhaust, probably an aftermarket filter, I'd assume, but it has the factory intake to keep it factory reliable up front. And the throttle body also looks factory. You even have the baffling and everything, so it almost looks like there's nothing to see here, folks. But honestly, I'm sure a full bolt-on, big Texas speed cam LS3 probably makes in the ballpark of 550 crank horse and high fours at the dyno, depending on what dyno and how it's done. So honestly, not too bad. Otherwise, all of your battery, your fuse box, your reservoirs, your alternator, your serpentine belt, everything's up top, easy to reach, easy to identify, and Corvette makes it simple for being a fairly compact package. Anyways, let's drop the hood, take it for a drive. Initial driving impressions of the full bolt-on and cammed C6 Corvette. Light on the accelerator. And it gets right up to speed. But this thing is rowdy. It shakes when it's idling. It's really loud under anything that's not an idle, and even the idle is really loud. But it's still a Corvette, so it's practical. There's 22 cubic feet of room back there. There's actually really good visibility in the C6. I do wish this had the glass target top, but we'll take what we can get. And overall, normal driving, it's pretty composed. I'm going about 40 right now, barely on the accelerator. And it's revving a little bit below 1500 RPM, easing up on the gas. Because this thing has so much power though, you really have to stab the gas pedal to get it to downshift. Otherwise, it just has enough power to rev out gears with probably almost 500 wheel horsepower. This thing is really rowdy, and the country roads are not well suited to it. Even though it has a Mickey T tire in the factory rear size, it is so easy to lose control even when traction control is left on. But let's take a corner, hopefully add a little bit of speed up here, and we'll see how it does. C6s handle really well. The hood rides pretty flat. I don't know if the suspension is adjusted on this one or if it's just the factory 14-year-old suspension at this point. But it does a really good job in giving it maybe a half gas pedal acceleration. Yeah, it gets right up to speed, and it's rowdy. The rear brake's loose. I'm not sure, I couldn't see with the camera if it was flashing the traction control light, but it definitely did not feel stable on the back end of this Corvette. And for being 50-50 weight balance, you know, these are usually a really stable car. I was able to drive that LS3 C6 last year, factory bone stock. That thing did not scare me like this one does. Having this much power and only so much grip on these streets, it really isn't well suited, and you really can't use the power levels. It's not like the C8 I just reviewed, the 2024. That thing you can use way more power at low speeds because it keeps traction with all the weight over the rear. But this thing, having so much power, makes it feel really playful, really amusing, and extremely raw. And I think for about a third of the price as what the C8s are going for, this is a much more terrifying and raw experience. So if that's what you're after, test drive a C6 with a big cam in it. Otherwise, one more little acceleration. Yeah, just partial throttle, because full throttle, it's gonna break the rear loose. This car, very impressive. This has been a very visceral, very surreal experience because I can't remember the last time I've been in a cammed LS. And after being in a supercharged LS3 not too long ago, this seriously feels so much more rowdy. Personally though, if I owned it, I would trade the catback exhaust back to the factory because there is some drone. It is definitely too loud for a daily driver. If this is a track car, sure, go ahead, blow out your eardrums, but driving it just around casually, it's a bit too loud for my taste, but very fun. Anyways guys, let's get to the 0 to 60. 0 to 60 in this Corvette. Keep in mind, density altitude's almost 4,000 feet, so it is down on power 12 to 14%. But because of the crazy power that this has, and my private road not having great traction, we're gonna just go off of idle. I'm gonna leave traction control on because we wanna keep the vehicle on the road today. And then after doing a few trials, I am actually gonna have to ease into the power. I can't just do a brake rev and launch it because we're just gonna get tire spin at that point. Let's go. True 0 to 60 came in at 4.75. So true 0 to 60, 4.75, definitely not very good. Without rollout though, it was a 4.4, which is pretty close to what these are rated at sea level on a sticky drag strip. And this was not launched. This was just a light rolling onto throttle from idle, and it still was losing traction with traction control on. Honestly, once it's going, it feels like it pulls as hard or harder than like a ZL1 Camaro. So honestly, if this was in prepped conditions at sea level, it probably would have ran between a 3.3 to a 3.5 is what my butt dyno is telling me. Otherwise, let's get to the final thoughts. Final thoughts of the full bolt-on cammed C6 Corvette is honestly, I've been waiting a long time to drive one of these. I've driven regular bone stock LS2 and LS3 Corvettes. I've been in a supercharged 6.2 liter Corvette. I've driven the new Stingray. I've driven the C7, the C5s. I've driven a lot of Corvettes, but I think I actually haven't been in a full bolt-on cammed one before. So how was the experience, and do I recommend it? 100% absolutely. If this is going to be your toy, if this is going to be your track car, the way this one is configured, although it does start up really well, it makes almost way too much power for the street, if we're being honest. It's hard to keep traction if you give it the go pedal. And with that blue color and the way that this one sounds, it's going to draw a lot of attention. So of course, make sure that your license and registration are up to speed and you have them on hand, because you might just need them with how much attention this one is going to get. But not only is it stunning because it's a C6 Corvette, but it has a body kit. It has the really nice Corvette gray wheels, and honestly, the lines, especially in blue, this one seriously stands out like nothing else. Remember, I'm going to link this one below if you're interested. It's at Twin Falls Chevy. But otherwise, if you like this video, please consider liking this video. Comment your thoughts and opinions below, where you're watching from, and what your thoughts are on the C6 Corvette. And subscribe if you haven't already. I wish you the best. I hope to see you again. And until next time, see you guys.